It's 1980, and a sexually frustrated housewife finds herself being stalked by a handsome stranger in a shopping mall. She winds up in his apartment, and after a long night of passion, she goes to leave in the middle of the night. But waiting for her in the elevator is a tall, homicidal blonde woman, wielding a very sharp razor blade. In the dawn of the 1980s, studios began churning out cheap Halloween imitators as a way to draw young audiences and make a quick buck. But it's important to remember that some directors were still lending an innovative spin to the slasher. Brian De Palma was looking back beyond Halloween, drawing inspiration from Hitchcock and Giallo, in order to make one of the strangest, most disturbing psychosexual slasher movies in the history of the genre. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the slasher and discuss Brian De Palma's Dressed to Kill.
This is Bobby. I borrowed your razor.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Mike and as ever I am your host. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. This podcast explores the history of the genre by reviewing key horror movies week by week. We're currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of the slasher and this is part 6. We're going to be talking all things Brian De Palma and Dressed to Kill. We're also going to talk briefly about another Brian De Palma film from a few years later called Body Double. Just so you know, the Dressed to Kill review will be a spoilerific, in-depth review. Body Double we'll talk about not quite as in-depth. It won't be quite as spoilerific. So if you haven't seen Body Double, don't worry as much. Predominantly, we will be looking at the cult classic Dressed to Kill. Now, before we get started, don't forget you can get in touch with us anytime. Do email evolutionofhorror@gmail.com or you can tweet us at evolutionpod. You can find our podcast on all major podcast platforms. And once again, I'm going to say a big thank you to everyone that has left an iTunes rating or review, including Tony Pomfret, Ellie May 91, Johnny H 72, Tuck Bain, Phil Abernathy, and Lucy 2005 rules. She does rule. Thank you so much to all those people that left me all those lovely comments on iTunes. And if you do get a chance, please do leave me a comment. If so, I will give you a shout out next time. Now, on with this week's podcast. And joining me to discuss all things Dressed to Kill is a fantastic critic, journalist, writer, podcaster. He is the entertainment director for Heat magazine, which means he covers TV, film, and all aspects of entertainment. He's also a film reviewer for Radio 5 Live. He also appears on BBC's Front Row. He does various things for BAFTA. He's got his own podcast, the Heat Unmissables podcast, and he pops up on various other TV and radio shows all over the place. There's no way, if you're remotely interested in entertainment, that you wouldn't have heard this guy's voice at some point or other. I am very, very proud to be joined by the brilliant Boyd Hilton. Boyd, hello.
Hello.
Boyd. Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
Welcome to my humble abode.
I know, this is great. You've got a very cool flat.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I won't say where it is. I don't want everyone to know where you live.
Yeah. We can say the general area.
Yeah,
Bermondsey.
but it's a very cool building. It's like this kind of, what is it, like an old factory?
It's an literally old factory, yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
And you've got, and I suppose you need to for your job, but you've got the biggest TV I have ever seen.
Yeah, it's 78 inches, Mike. Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. But I've got, because it's what's it called? It's a wide room, isn't it? So it doesn't look too ridiculous.
No,
Please tell me.
It doesn't at all. That's the thing. It's a big open
Thank
space.
God. Yeah. It's a big open space, exactly. Yeah.
Great, cool. So we are going to be talking about, but basically I sort of asked you if you wanted to do this and you suggested the film that we're going to talk about for this. Obviously we're kind of at the moment exploring the slasher genre. We've done kind of Hitchcock, we've done Psycho, we've done Peeping Tom, Halloween, all those kind of movies. This one is one that I think a lot of people might not think of when they're thinking of slashers, maybe because it's a little bit more mainstream, it's got some big names in it, I don't know, but it definitely is. But anyway, you were the one that suggested doing this movie because you are a big fan of this, aren't you?
Huge fan. It's one of my all-time favourites, and I've got a very kind of personal relationship to it. So, and also Brian De Palma generally is probably my favourite director. Like, it's one, that some directors, I think, you religiously watch all their films once you've seen one of them. So once I think probably this was the first one I saw, and then I religiously watched the ones that come before, and then seen every single one afterwards many times, probably. Even the really terrible recent ones. And I went to see this film unbelievably. I was 13 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously this is a hard 18, hard. It was actually, in fact, on the DVD Blu-ray that I lent you, there's a whole, I don't know if you watched it, there's a whole documentary about how they had to edit it from an X, or in America or whatever the equivalent was, to get an R rating, and they had to do lots of kind of cuts to get it. So it was, and there's nudity and there's, I mean, the opening scene is the woman masturbating in the shower, and then she has sex with her husband, and then this and that. So it's an incredible film. My dad took me.
That's brilliant.
And we were on holiday in Florida, in Miami, and I just insisted on him taking him to see it, and I think he was quite excited to see anyway. Angie Dickinson naked, I think he was quite excited to see. Of course, using a body double, obviously.
Of course.
And I was just blown away by it. And I think, I mean, I'm not encouraging 13-year-olds to see it or anything.
So there'd be a lot of 13-year-olds that would have very strange feelings, I think, going to watch this.
Absolutely. And obviously, I think I've grown up and I'm not too, I haven't become a serial killer or anything, so it didn't have too disastrous effect. But do you know what? I mainly loved it for the filmmaking. I know it sounds incredibly pretentious, but even as a 13-year-old, a precocious 13-year-old, already into films in quite a major way, because it's such a kind of baroque, elaborate piece of filmmaking. As well as being, a proper slasher film, I think. That I just loved it. I just couldn't. I could not believe that someone was this kind of film. It was like you see some kind of films and you think this is pushed back the boundaries for me, because it's got split screens. It's got incredibly intricate set pieces. It's got everything, and extreme violence, obviously, nudity, everything. It's got the whole lot. So it just had a huge effect on me, and became I was kind of, I liked a few. I think I'd seen some Hitchcock films, and I was already into Hitchcock. I'd seen Psycho, I think, on TV. So I could see the obvious connection between Hitchcock and De Palma. And so from then on, it's been I'm on the Brian De Palma train, really.
That's great.
And I can't get off.
No, it's brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. And I'm so glad that you suggested doing this, because I to be honest, I probably wouldn't have even thought to put this in the series as a slasher movie. There might be a lot of people out there that would argue that this is more of a thriller than a horror, but you'd very much consider this a horror slasher movie, would you?
I think what is interesting about it, and what's interesting, we're going to talk about Body Double a bit later as well, similarly, is you cannot pin down Carrie is out and out horror, isn't it? I mean, that's undeniable. That's the kind of, it's obviously it's about Carrie's supernatural powers. It's a supernatural horror, effectively, and incredibly effective all the way through for that. But I think his the Brian De Palma films that he probably, I think, that are absolutely as close to his heart and his fans' hearts as much as possible, which are this, Dressed to Kill, Body Double, Blowout, which is the one in between. I think Blowout was the one after this. Blowout, unbelievably, has a serial killer in it, or it has a kind of fake serial killing in it.
Right.
Completely, semi-gratuitously, and it's really a political thriller, Right.
Brian De Palma's Blowout. Now you hear it. Now you don't.
So it's more of a thriller, very Hitchcockian thriller, but he still managed to incorporate serial killing in it somehow, and really horrible, nasty stalking of women. Let's face it. And then films like Obsession, which is a very his kind of remake of Vertigo, effectively. Blah blah blah. But what I'm saying is that really the reason I love his films is because they are so ambitiously made, and they are kind of very arty in some ways, and sometimes unbelievably indulgent, and there's very long walking and stalking sequences in this and Body Double, which you're not going to get in Friday the 13th and My Bloody Valentine or whatever. So I again, without wanting to sound too pretentious about it, I love his films because they're so beautifully made and so and bold and daring, and that's what I love about them. I also do really enjoy the violence and the scariness of them, of course, but they are above and beyond those normal slasher films. And I think the reason why probably you haven't come across them as standard slasher films is just because they're so great. They're just absolutely brilliantly made pieces of filmmaking. And it's like, well, for all its charms, Friday the 13th kind of isn't. It's just a fairly basic, isn't it? A fairly basic film.
It's
I think Halloween is obviously a brilliant film. So it's kind of, I think the films at the peak of the horror genre for me that I love are the ones that just happen to be kind of brilliant films in their own right. And I think Just to Kill is certainly one of those.
Yeah, so I was going to say, what's your kind of relationship like with horror movies? Aside from Brian De Palma, are you a fan of those kind of movies, of sort of the slasher genre?
Well, I'm not really a fan. I definitely am not a fan of like the Friday the 13th films.
Yeah.
I love Halloween, and
Yeah.
I love the original Halloween. I'm not particularly keen on the subsequent 8 gazillion Halloweens.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy a horror film, no matter how basic it is. I mean, I have to say, I would say that. So I very happily sit through all of those films. I just would never. I probably would never bother watching them again or anything like that.
Choosing to put one on, yeah.
Choosing to put one on, or really, whereas I've watched Halloween and Dressed to Kill and Body Double and Psycho, and the real, for me, the absolute masterpieces again and again and again.
Yeah.
But I will watch. I Know What They Did Last Summer 1 and 2. Was there a 2? There was a 2.
There was. I still know what you did. Last
Still thank you.
Yeah.
And the Scream. I mean, the first Scream film was great. Is a really good film.
Yeah.
So. This is a kind of rambling way of saying I will watch anything, pretty much. And certainly horror is up there with my favourite genres. But I'm not an expert. I'm not, like Nigel Floyd, and probably some of the other people you've interviewed in this podcast series. I don't religiously follow and analyse the genre and make sure I see all of those old ones in all those different series and franchises.
Yeah.
I just happen to love a lot of really good horror films.
Yeah.
One more thing, interesting thing about, I can go on about it all day, but about, of course, Dressed to Kill, is it came out the same year as Cruising. I don't know if you've seen Cruising.
Yeah, I have. William Friedkin.
Right, the William Friedkin film, which is one of my favourite films,
Yeah.
along with The Exorcist. And Brian De Palma was offered Cruising first.
Oh, right.
So the interesting thing about it is Brian De Palma's version of Cruising would have been astonishing. I mean, William Friedkin's version is brilliant, but Brian De Palma's version would have been even more baroque.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. I'd love to see that version. And in the documentary, the recent documentary that came out, I think last year, which I love, is basically the documentary is basically Jake Kasdan and another director, Noah Baumbach.
Oh yeah,
two young trendy directors.
It's a huge De Palma film, isn't
yeah.
it? Noah Baumbach.
They're both right. So they're both huge fans, and they
Yeah.
literally just film him sitting there talking through his career, talking through every single film, and it's just couldn't be better for a De Palma fan.
Yeah.
And in that, he talks about how he was offered Cruising, and I can't even remember why he ended up not doing it. I think he just thought, Billy Friedkin will do a great job, and I'll do something else. And then he created Dressed to Kill so they could do his. But Cruising is a very stalk and slash film, really.
It is,
apart from the whole cruising gay underground element of it, and Al Pacino kind of becoming gay, which is amazing.
Yeah.
It's about a really horrible, nasty serial killer who's slashing his victims.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know what you have to do. Now I'm afraid.
So these two films both came out in 1980.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, and two great films in their own right that happen to deal with hardcore, violent, serial killing slasher characters.
It is funny because, I think Kim Newman mentioned this to me that when a film is good or is directed by someone with a bit of esteem, people are reluctant to want to call it a horror film. Almost,
exactly.
It's almost like again, people don't always include Dressed to Kill in the conversation with other slasher movies or horror movies, maybe because it's too good or too arty or something.
That's exactly
which is,
the point. Yeah.
I think is a bit harsh, but
it's weird. But it's a weird special thing about genres like horror.
Yeah.
Because particularly maybe unique to horror.
Yeah.
I mean, no one ever would not call some terrible comedy film that comes out, it's not a comedy.
Yeah.
But because horror has its aficionados, I guess part of the whole reason you're doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Dressed to Kill, because it is what it is, and it has long huge chunks of time go by without anything really happening, particularly in terms of violence.
Yeah,
and there's only a couple of scenes, aren't there? I guess of violence, but one of which I think is one of the greatest slashing scenes in cinema history.
Totally, yeah.
You're right. Exactly. Yeah, Kim's right. Kim's point is absolutely right. That people don't consider horror, but of course it's a horror film.
Yeah,
I mean, and De Palma absolutely. I think he explains in that documentary, and I've read many interviews with him, and he's not pompous about it at all. He absolutely was setting out to scare people.
Yeah,
that was his thing. He just happens to love. It's all for him. It all comes from his visual sense.
Yeah,
and so it's all his films are put together first and foremost. Plotting out how can I do an elaborate, visually exciting sequence, and kind of all the rest of it is secondary, I think, to him. So I think he's a brilliantly effective person who's scaring people, and I think there's stuff in Dressed to Kill that's scarier than anything else I can think of. In proper horror films, stalk and slash horror films. But it is also just a brilliant film.
Do you find me attractive?
Of course.
Would you want to sleep with me?
Yes.
Then why don't you?
Because I love my wife, and it isn't worth jeopardizing my marriage.
Brian De Palma, the master of the macabre, who shocked audiences everywhere with Sisters, Carrie, Obsession, and The Fury, now invites you to a showing of the latest fashion in murder. Dressed to Kill, Michael Caine, Angie Dickinson, Nancy Allen, Dressed to Kill, Murder.
It kind of starts off with Angie Dickinson is the heroine, and it kind of just establishes her rather frustrated life. She's got a kind of rather boring husband, I think, works in the city.
Yeah.
She's got a charming teenage son, and the opening kind of see her in the shower, as I said before,
Yes.
masturbating, obvious body double.
Yeah.
And then she has perfunctory sex with her husband. I think maybe there's a whole fantasy thing going on there.
It's kind of a mix of everything, because you've got one guy, he's looking in the mirror and he's got a razor blade and he's
That's
shaving
right,
himself
yeah.
as she's masturbating,
Yeah.
and then a guy comes up behind her and he's kind of, you don't know whether he's about to kill her or
Right.
have sex with her,
Right.
and it's all that kind of sex and danger.
Totally.
You know.
And of course, his tribute to the shower scene in Psycho.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Very obvious.
Also, really reminded me of the opening of Carrie, where she
Yes.
has her first period in the shower, and it
Totally.
is that same kind of look and the misty,
misty,
and
a lot of
the,
mist.
the big music.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. He loves. There's a voyeuristic naked
Yeah.
women in shower, steamy shower situation thing going on that there clearly was in Carrie.
Yeah.
Amazing that he got away with that opening sequence. By the way, can you
Yeah.
imagine that now? I just can't.
No.
I mean, there's lots of things that Brian De Palma did that you literally could not get away with now.
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely.
Even in the most hard core of horror
yeah,
films.
definitely.
So it establishes this dissatisfied woman's life, and then we see her her son is this inventor, this genius inventor who's creating this kind of weird computer thing in his basement. She goes off and goes to the art gallery, and she basically has an incredibly brilliantly directed scene where she's flirting with this guy who's kind of following her, and she's following him. They're following each other. Eventually goes back to his flat. Well, they start having sex in the cab. She goes back to his apartment, has sex with him, realises that he's got a venereal disease. It's a bad day.
Which was a brilliant moment.
Brilliant moment.
Absolutely. When
Yeah.
she looks at the form and it says,
Yeah.
"You have got a venereal disease!" Exclamation mark.
Exactly,
as
which is
well.
definitely what you'd say on that form. Yeah. And then she's she's having a really terrible day. She's escaping from this guy's flat in his building, and then basically she gets murdered in the elevator by a transvestite serial killer.
Yeah.
In a wig, and in that extraordinary scene where she's in this lift, as we call them, and Nancy Allen's character, which kind of arrives at this point and kind of witnesses what's going on. She's kind of with some businessman. She's shagging
who
this
very
guy.
quickly runs away.
Runs
Yeah,
away
yeah.
brilliantly. Yeah, men don't come out of it very well. I mean, he's called a misogynist, but of course he's much more critical of men generally than women.
Yeah.
Women are the victims. So there's this unbelievably lavish murder in the lift where he's wielding it's a cutthroat razor that the transvestite killer is wielding. Again, even then, the whole trans element of it,
Yeah,
I mean, he
yeah.
did get quite a lot of criticism even at the time, I think.
I can imagine.
Yeah, from having a psychotic trans person. I mean, whole theses have been written about, I'm sure, trans characters being considered psychotic. Psychopaths, yeah. I think I'm not here to defend him, but he's talked about how it's just an idea that there could be a trans person who has these feelings. And anyway, but the scene is one of my favourite scenes in one of my favourite films, the elevator scene. And you see my favourite moment in it, the shot in it that I think is incredible, is you see the most violent moment and kind of the horrendous face, if you like, of the trans killer in the mirror at the top of the kind of security mirror, whatever you call it, concave convex mirror. And so it's all distorted.
Yeah.
And it's kind of in slow motion, and it's just classic De Palma. It's just like, coming up with these disturbing. I mean, it's bad enough that this woman's being slashed to death by a cutthroat razor, being wielded by a trans serial killer. But then he just adds to the whole horror of the situation with the visuals, with these weird queasy. It's really weird.
It's a really
isn't it?
kind of troubling.
Yeah.
Everything about it.
Right.
It's great, and that was a real shocking moment in so many ways, because I thought up until that point this woman was the heroine.
Right.
And
Well.
obviously it's a very kind of Hitchcockian thing.
Yeah.
At that point, I just thought, well, what the hell is going to happen now? A third of the way in,
Totally. And
she's
now
been brutally murdered.
Absolutely, totally psycho. Yeah. So it's Janet Leigh in Psycho. I mean, Brian De Palma has no qualms about the fact that all of his greatest films are Hitchcock remakes, effectively, or reboots, reimaginings, and this is the greatest one.
Of course, yeah. And actually, I suppose, the fact that it's a transvestite. I mean, Norman Bates dressed as his mother.
Absolutely,
yeah.
I have to say, I think it's a really good script, because he does, in terms of like the structure of it and everything, because he brings Nancy Allen in, who then becomes the heroine for the rest of the film, because she's witnessing the crime and kind of wanting to deal with it and going to the detective, brilliantly played by Dennis Franz, who's in a lot of Brian De Palma films.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably unhelpful.
Yeah, he's hilarious.
He's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, but you're not a psycho. You do know some, though, don't you, Doc?
And from then on, she's kind of the heroine, trying to find out what the hell's happened, while the now murdered Angie Dickinson's son, geeky son, is also joins in cahoots with her, to try and find out who the hell the killer is. Meanwhile, of course, we haven't mentioned, unbelievably, Michael Caine as Angie Dickinson's shrink, who is introduced early on. And so she tells Michael Caine's character, the shrink, about a lot of her inner fantasies, and she kind of there's a scene where she's kind of like flirting with him, or he's flirting with her, and she's addressing the fact, am I going to have? What would it be? Would it be against the rules if we had sex?
It's a brilliant moment.
A brilliant moment. But it's really, do we know who this trans razor throat wielding person is? Can Nancy Allen's character find out, track him down with the kid, with the teenage son, and what's going to happen in the end? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's a fairly obvious. I mean, it's fairly obvious what's going to happen in the end.
Yeah. And by the way, we can talk about spoilers.
Oh,
in
fine,
this as
good.
well.
Okay, I don't know why I'm avoiding the ending of a film that came out in 1980.
Yeah. We're just going to go into all of them. However much detail.
Yeah. So Michael Caine is the killer. That's the point.
Yeah.
And again, I love the fact that Michael Caine, who. I'm trying to remember what else he did around that time, but certainly it was an unusual role for him to take, to say the least. And
he does it really well.
He does it really well. Exactly, you're right. Yeah, and I love the bit right at the end where you see him in his dressed as a woman. Yeah, trying to kill Nancy Allen's character. It's a fantastic sequence, and he's great in it. I can watch it again, and it also has the final pièce de résistance. Is it has a Carrie-esque ending. It has this
it really does,
the nightmare, which again is I remember, I mean, the whole film is scary, but that absolutely terrified me. So it has this kind of, you think it's ended and you think it's all been resolved, and Michael Caine's character's been killed, but then there's one more ending, and I guess there is a fashion in there in a lot of horror films for the final moment. There's a kind of, you think it's over, and sometimes it's terrible and forced. Yeah, and of course Carrie is the greatest one of all time, where the hand comes out and it's all that's just the nightmare. Yeah. But this has a very similar nightmare ending, which I think I even prefer it to Carrie. I think it's so horrible. It's really horrible.
I think it's not. I think the difference is that Carrie somehow feels so simple. This one feels quite elaborate.
It is, of course.
It
goes on and on.
Long, elaborate dream just for that payoff.
Exactly. And clearly De Palma thought, well, that thing I did in Carrie worked brilliantly. Now I'm going to do it like times 10.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it felt a bit like that. It felt a bit like a sort of mishmash of different movies and different great scenes from different movies. Obviously, there's lots of Hitchcock. There's a bit of Carrie. There's that moment, I think is it in the dream sequence as well, when at the very end when he's kind of stalking her from outside the house, and it looks very much like the opening of Halloween as he's kind of wandering. It's a kind of POV as he's wandering into the house at night, and it did feel like a kind of, and also a lot of it reminds me a bit of those Italian horror movies of the 60s and 70s. You're the kind of Dario Argento,
the giallos, totally.
The giallos. It's got that real kind of lavish, blood pouring, over the top music. I suppose that comes from Italian cinema in general a bit.
I think it does, and I think it's funny because he doesn't talk about Argento in that film, in that De Palma documentary, but I have seen him mention him before, and I think he just talks about. In fact, I think what he talks about isn't so much that there's direct influence. It's more that he at the same time. And when did Suspiria come out? I'm trying to remember.
77,
pretty late 70s, and then you've got a lot of hardcore, massively elaborate operatic horrors from Dario Argento. And I think what De Palma does say is they're all trying to outdo each other, in terms of visual. How far can you go? Yeah. In all senses, in terms of the violence, the visual elaborateness of it. It's not
Yeah.
a word. Just the operatic, over the topness of them all, and that's why. And I do love. I mean, I am a. Of course, I totally forgot to mention Argento. I'm a huge Argento fan.
Oh, are
so
you?
yeah.
Right.
So I think it's because I did see De Palma mention him not long after Just to Kill came out, and almost talking about how I'm not the only one making these films about women being brutally slain in an incredibly baroque manner. There's also Dario Argento, and so I kind of I've got to track him down. So I did see, I'm one of those people who went to, the cinemas at the time would show Argento double bills.
Brilliant.
So I am a huge fan of his, but I do think for me, like with Argento, I some of the films just are so. Within them, variable in quality. You have an incredible. I mean, this is apologies to Argento. I mean, I am a fan. Yeah. But even in Suspiria, there are moments that are like, oh, he's not really. I feel he's losing interest in a scene of exposition, maybe, or do you know what I mean?
He has no interest in narrative.
No interest in narrative. Whereas I think De Palma does. So for me, the reason why I would have De Palma above the Argentos of this world is that every single scene, I think, in Dressed to Kill is showing his love of cinema and his mastery of it. Even the scenes that are just, the mum talking to the son about his computer. Yeah. Even, he's finding a way to make that visually interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, in most of probably his rivals, if you like, of the time, they're like, well, in a basic scene, it's going to be quite basic. Yeah. There's no basic moment in Dressed to Kill.
No, it's true. He's a big fan of that kind of, you've got one character sort of very near, close to frame, and stuff going on in the background.
Exactly.
And I remember that in Carrie as well. You've got a lot of that going on. Like, was that cool, that kind of technique?
I don't.
It kind of looks kind of
deep
focus
focus
in
is
between.
It might be cool. Oh, you're right. I should know the technical term, but I think I may be wrong. But I think he says he invented it. I think
probably.
I'm pretty sure he did, and he talks about I think he talks about it as an alternative to split screen. He uses a lot of split screen. Yeah. Particularly in Carrie. Yeah. And at one point he says, I think, that he realised that the split screen, while it's not so effective at showing being scary in two situations. Right, and he thought it was scarier to have this effect of, you're right, the real focus of the character. Yeah. One character in the foreground and still being able to see what's going on in the background. I think it's deep focus. Yeah. But it's great.
One of my favourite moments is when they're on the subway train. That is really great. And she's being harassed by the sort of gang of guys that are sort of after. She's running away from them, and then she's also got the killer is on the train with her. And there's a moment when she sort of looks out of the train carriage, and you see lots of pillars and different people emerging from behind them at different times. Yeah. And again, it's kind of got that very kind of there's like millions of things it looks like going on all in the frame at the same time, and you're kind of you're sort of glancing at every person and every inch of what's going on.
Absolutely,
you can spot. It's great.
Incredible set piece. It's just full of set pieces, isn't it? Almost probably every scene is like and that he does love a good train chase sequence. Carlito's Way,
right? Oh, of course.
One of the I mean, he kind of. I think he just decided to try and top his own train chase sequence from Dressed to Kill by having another one in Carlito's Way that is one of the best scenes he's ever directed. Yeah, absolutely brilliant scene in that. And I remember him telling the story again. You've got to see the documentary. The funniest bit of the documentary is talking about how Pacino is so pissed off with him taking all night to film this bloody train scene. De Palma's in one train with the camera filming Pacino in another train running literally through a real train. Yeah. And Pacino just ordered, he was so pissed off for the whole day of filming this thing and never getting it quite right, because it's very difficult to do back in those days, that he just got the train to carry on, took him all the way home and went, literally got the train driver to take him away from Brian De Palma. And Brian De Palma was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm fed up, I'm going home.
Can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. What was he like to work with as a director then? Was he a hard taskmaster, do you think?
I don't think he was. I think from what I've seen I've watched all the there's documentaries on both, I think, of the Blu-ray DVD re-releases of Dressed to Kill.
It's an Arrow one.
Yeah, the Arrow ones are great, these Arrow editions. Yeah, and the body double one is Powerhouse Films, which is a very similar, or Indicator Powerhouse. It's a similar kind of packaging, but it has documentaries and interviews with people who are in it. I mean, Naziano, of course, he was I think he was married to the star of
right.
Dressed to Kill. He did a few films with her. He did Blowout as well. So she's not going to be too horrible about it. But Angie Dickinson's really, really positive about him. Yeah. I think it was a big thing, even though she does get killed after half an hour, brutally. I think she's really proud of it. Quite rightly. And I think I get the sense that, unlike Hitchcock, who famously often didn't like. I mean, he obsessively loved his blonde female stars, but still kind of had this weird semi-abusive relationship with some of them.
Yeah.
I don't think De Palma ever did stuff like that. I think he was pretty good to his cast, and I think he. I think I get the sense that he kind of left them alone to do what they were doing, and if he was happy with it, that was great. While he concocted these massively elaborate visuals around them.
Do you think it's scary?
I think it's really scary.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. Yeah, I mean, obviously I saw it when I was 13. I was really scared then. But every time I see it, it gives me chills because I think I think the phrase, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up, it does do that to me with, the key scenes, the elevator scene, probably the chase in the train, I think, is scary. I think the obviously that ending, the trick ending, is unbelievably terrifying. So it just hasn't got that many of them. I mean, a lot of it is, when you've got a film that must be like a 10-minute sequence where they're walking through this museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, just kind of trying to find each other and work out whether they are going to end up flirting, meeting each other or not. Yeah, that scene, that kind of cruising scene, if you like, one woman cruising each other. That's not obviously scary in any way whatsoever. So there are lots of elements of it that aren't. Yeah. But I think the scary moments are incredibly effective. Yeah, that's my long-winded answer.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, because it definitely, it's not just a pure horror movie, is it? That's the thing. It also has a lot of that other cover. It's definitely it's got elements of it that are like some sort of erotic thriller or completely, even close to a porno. I think at times, the way a scene is set up or whatever.
Yeah, I think a lot of what he does is, and this is even more the case of Body Double, but a lot of what he's doing is taking the Hitchcock kind of technique and elaborating on it and doing even more and more stuff to kind of visually thrill the audience. And it just so happens that he can get away with more. So it's almost like, well, what if Hitchcock was directing in the 80s, And in fact, if you see Frenzy, have you seen Frenzy?
Yeah. And
that's a fucking shocking film.
It really is, yeah.
And you see clearly Hitchcock didn't have any qualms about going really, really far in terms of nudity and that horrendous rape scene in that film. Yep. And I think De Palma makes the point quite clear that if he was directing in the 80s, he would have been doing this kind of stuff. He would have had even more sex, violence, nudity, and as you say, bordering on porn, probably. Yeah. Because he could have got away with it. So it's like, well, I'm going to do what Hitchcock couldn't get away with in every way. Yeah. And what more can you want?
And let's talk about that murder scene in the lift then, because it kind of feels like that is the kind of centerpiece of the movie, and they really don't hold back on the gore. Actually, no. I was shocked.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Exactly, it's a very important point because a lot of Brian De Palma, the most famous violent scenes, set piece murders, are actually less violent than you think they are. Yes. So I'm thinking of even Scarface, which has some famous chainsaw action in it. Yeah. And for Scarface, he had a really long battle with the ratings board to get an R. And you don't see. I've seen the the unrated version, and you don't see much chainsaw action as you think you do. Yeah. And obviously there's a huge amount of shooting going on, but that's fine. Yeah. Even in Body Double, even the drilling scene in Body Double, which we might talk about a bit after this. That, where a man is using a massive power drill to kill a woman. You see all kinds of horrible things, but you don't see a lot of that. You see less of it than you think, I think, if you really analyse it. But in this scene, in the elevator razor blade scene, you see him slashing her body repeatedly, and particularly in this now. I mean, in the original version, that's what they had to cut a lot of, obviously, to get past. Hardly surprising because it's horrendous. Yeah, her face, her body, and everything, and a lot of blood. Yeah, and he talks about how he uses a very bright colour of blood, because like film blood, he doesn't want it. He talks about real blood being almost like brown, and he wants it to be. It's more shocking to have proper red blood. Red,
and that's very Argento.
Very Argento, exactly. So it is shockingly, horribly nasty.
It is. It really kind of made me wince. And there's a brilliant moment of tension when the other main actress, what's her name? Sorry, Angie Dickinson. Yeah, she is about to come into the lift, and her fingers are kind of going round the lift door.
Yeah, brilliant.
And then obviously obviously the killer is there with his razor blade, and I was just waiting for him to kind of slice off her fingertips or something, and it doesn't happen, but it's a really like
totally
inducing moment.
Yeah, and a very slow motion, and the score, which I think is by Pino Donaggio, who is a guy he worked with loads. I think he did like 8-9 films with Pino Donaggio, who's kind of like Bernard Herrmann, he's like his Bernard Herrmann. He did use Bernard Herrmann, I think, once or twice. Yeah. But I think by that point he died. And he has very, very over the top music, and it's incredible in that scene. There's like high pitched, Pino Donaggio's strings going at it, kind of like his version of the Psycho music, I guess. It's an incredibly shocking scene. I think the whole idea of a razor is just really horrible, isn't it? I mean, even more as a weapon, brutal, chainsaws. Are scary, obviously, but there's something really basically awful about an open razor blade.
There is, it's in that kind of small way, isn't it? It's and obviously the weapons are a huge part of the slasher movie. It's almost like the key thing, really, in a slasher movie, whether it's a chainsaw, a kitchen knife, a machete, that kind of becomes the iconic part of whatever that film is. And that's totally the case with this. It's another reason that I would say that this is a slasher, because I think the razor blade and the actual image of this killer holding a razor blade is so kind of it's burned into your memory. It's quite iconic of the movie.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the other thing is probably the reason why there aren't more scenes, the more slash killing scenes. He just doesn't need it.
No,
because that and I think it's like that is the confidence of him as a director, really. Yeah. So he gives you this unbelievable moment of horror, and then you're just scared it's going to happen again throughout the rest of the film, even though it doesn't really. And maybe there's another scene. There's a lot of stalking going on, and you see the killer hanging out, in his kind of scary blonde look. So the blonde wig and the dark glasses look. And again, it's like, well, it's not so much the fact that it's a trans character, it's a man wearing this outfit, but it's just the look is creepy and horrible, isn't it?
It is,
it's such a kind of something really, really horrible about it.
Yeah.
So you do see that character wielding the razor maybe a couple of more times, don't you? But there isn't actually, as far as, unless I'm misremembering it, much more violence.
No, there isn't. Not until all those dreams.
The dream sequence,
elaborate dream sequence.
So again, it's like, I think it just adds to the whole brilliance of it. You're just so scared it's going to happen again, but it doesn't need to happen again.
Yeah. And it's true, because then you're kind of on the edge of your seat for the rest of the movie. You have no idea kind of where it's going and what's going to happen. It's interesting, because I looked up on IMDb, and I think it came out a month later or a month earlier than Friday the 13th. So they came out very, very close together.
Yeah.
And obviously there was a whole bunch, there was a wave of sort of post-Halloween slasher movies that came out in 1980 as well. And like you say, Cruising came out in 1980, and then all these other ones. How did this one do? Do you know?
I think it was a hit. It did well. It was definitely one of his bigger hits, I think, at the time. I think it's one of those films for him. I think he lists in the documentary this. Completely different types of films, but The Untouchables, Mission Impossible, Carrie. His career was dotted through films that did well, brilliantly well, and artistically for him. He was really proud of them.
Yeah.
And they did well at the box office. Yeah. And they'd got critical raves as well. And even though, of course, Dressed to Kill got a lot of criticism from feminists at the time, and ever since. In fact, although I think now, it's weird now, actually. I think now he's kind of been embraced. But I've seen feminist film critics being big fans of his. It's so weird that it's almost like, because they are not doing what those basic slasher films that were literally just one female after another being slashed, right, and stalked. Yeah. Because there is so much more to them, undeniably. Yeah. That I think the quality of them means that they are the people who at the time just thought, oh no, this is porn. In fact, there's a brilliant interview, I think it's in the Body Double booklet, with a feminist critic who accuses him of making Body Double of being hardcore porn, which it's an insane accusation. That's her first question. It's like, well, it's just not. It's just like, what is she watching? You know? And I think that was conducted close to the release. And Body Double was 1984, I think. So what I'm saying is that it was a critical success. And critics could see, even though it was, even though there was a whole world of slasher films coming out at that time, this was something special. It wasn't just another one of those. Yeah. So I think, and I think a lot of his career afterwards was a bit trying to recapture that magic. That you can make an extraordinarily violent exploitation slasher film, horror film, genre film, if you like, but it to be absolutely brilliant at the same time and get rave notices and loads of people seeing it, that getting all that magical combination. I think he kind of was trying to do that a lot more, and almost never happened again, because I'm trying. Body Double was a disaster in terms of both critically and commercially.
Was it? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even Blowout, which is brilliant. I mean, Blowout, a lot of people consider to be his masterpiece. I prefer Dressed to Kill. I love Blowout, which was his next film. Was didn't do well at the box office and was really expensive. So that was a kind of a flop.
Yeah.
Got good reviews. Then there was also Pauline Kael. Do you know Pauline Kael?
Yeah,
The legendary, probably,
of course, yeah.
She was the legendary film critic of The New Yorker
Yeah.
in the 70s and 80s, and she loved Brian De Palma. And she absolutely set the critical trend, if you like, I think, because she was so revered. So people like Scorsese and all these people were like, kind of friends with her, and she used to hang out with these great directors.
Yeah.
Coppola, all of them, really. Spielberg, and she loved De Palma. And I remember going back and reading, there's a book of hers, I think it's called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, it's like a compendium of her reviews. And her reviews of Brian De Palma films are amazing because she so loves him. Right. Even Body Double she likes, which everyone else hated.
Yeah.
So she was a staunch. So again, I think generally, like, he did get good reviews even for the films, but he didn't have that many hits until he's kind of that weird, slightly later period in his career when he started doing these really big commercial films like The Untouchables and
absolutely.
Mission Impossible.
Yeah, when he became mainstream. Yeah, I mean, what do you? I mean, obviously, I'm guessing you don't think these films are misogynist then. In sort of the way
I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to mansplain.
Yeah, two guys talking about
two
whether or
guys
not
talking,
something is
misogynist.
feminist.
Yeah. But I think they're too good to be misogynistic. And I know that might sound stupid, and the other thing, they may be sexist. So I think there's a difference, isn't there?
Yeah.
Misogyny is literally hatred of women.
Yeah.
And I think, and they're about misogyny. I think that's the difference. They're definitely about men who hate women.
Yeah.
And men want to kind of and can't cope with being in the Consent to Dress to Kill. It's literally the weird thing about the guy when he gets aroused, he wants to kill these women. Which is a bizarre, possibly not entirely factually accurate psychological insight. I don't know. So it's definitely about men that are chasing women in a ridiculous, horrible, nasty way. In terms of the visual undressing, quite literally, of women in these films, it's sexist. They're definitely being used as sex objects by the camera. Yeah. It's definitely the male gaze and all of that.
A male gaze.
I mean, writ large.
Yeah.
But I think he's aware of it. He's not like he's not. Do you know what's the good contrast would be? The Transformers films, famously. Mark Kermode the main thing he would go on about, famously hates the Transformers, quite rightly, about Michael Bay's, and Michael Bay's lasciviousness in filming, is inappropriate to those films. These are like PG or whatever, maybe PG-13, 12 certificate, sci-fi film about a fucking toy, and he's got lascivious shots of some woman's arse in
Megan Fox bending over a car. Yeah.
Whereas that's sexism / misogyny, definitely, like, whatever you want to call it. Whereas I think Brian De Palma films, he's completely aware of what he's doing. He's completely commenting on the male gaze and men and Hitchcock and what it all means and films themselves. It's not like, I think it hasn't got the stupidity of misogyny for me.
Definitely, and like you say, I think it's about that, isn't it? As well, that's the thing. I suppose Transformers films don't have a point to make about girls bending over cars.
Absolutely
they just
not. Yeah.
Whereas, we said earlier, didn't we? Like, I think Paul Verhoeven is another good director you could compare to Brian De Palma.
Yeah, definitely
Probably influenced by De Palma, but like the movies like Showgirls and Basic Instinct, whether or not and there's always that argument of whether or not they're sexist,
completely
or feminist,
and also
and Elle recently as well.
Elle, I mean, I love Elle. I'm one of the I think Elle is a feminist masterpiece.
Yeah,
even though I'm and I know I've had an argument about it with different female critics, and some of them do agree. But some it's
really split people down.
Totally split people. Yeah, but I love Basic Instinct, and I think that's his most De Palma-esque film. Showgirls Showgirls is terrible in all kinds of ways, but but it's brilliantly watchable and very fun. I think knowing what you're doing with this stuff is kind of a key, and it's I think what they're setting out to do isn't to hate women, or isn't to abuse women for our pleasure. I think that's the subject matter of those films. Yeah, women being the victim. And De Palma does say something stupid in the documentary. I think it says something like, I just prefer watching women, or like, he's basically a heterosexual man. He's just saying, I'm interested.
More pleasing.
He's being honest. He's more pleasing to him. It's just an honest response, but it isn't helping him in the sexism.
Sometimes you wish these directors wouldn't talk. You know, like, it's like Lars von Trier, isn't it? You just don't want.
Exactly.
Don't bother.
Yeah. And, he's a 70, isn't he? I think he's like mid 70s now, De Palma. But bottom line is, I don't think they're misogynistic. No.
Yeah. Well, I think before we finish, we should also touch briefly on another Brian De Palma movie that you lent me your Blu-ray copy of this, along with Dressed to Kill, and this is the absolutely bonkers Body Double.
Brian De Palma, the modern master of suspense, invites you to witness a seduction, a mystery, a murder. Body Double. You can't believe everything you see.
Now, I can understand why you're a huge fan of Dressed to Kill, but Boyd, I do not understand why you would have asked me to watch Body Double. This was a terrible movie.
So I gave it to you because it's like the Brian De Palma, all the flaws writ large, and all the great stuff, and I just love it because it's so demented. It's like I think Dressed to Kill is a masterpiece, and you know, and I would defend it, and everything about it is brilliant. Whereas Body Double, I'm aware. I mean, I saw that film in the cinema as well. By that point, I was like, well, I'm going to see every Brian De Palma film. 1984. I'm trying to work out I was then. I was 17.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time thinking, oh right, this is a bit shit.
Oh, right, okay. Even as a 17-year-old.
Even as a 17-year-old, and yet loving it at the same time. So this is a film, and it isn't. And you rightly said it's not a stalk and slash film. It's not really a horror film. It is his remake of Rear Window meets elements of Vertigo, meets elements of Psycho a bit, and remaking his own and using his own stuff as influence. I mean, there's Dressed to Kill. There's bits of Blowout and Obsession, you know, and it's basically. But again, in the centre of it is a horrendous murder scene where this guy in an Indian. It's called the Indian. This Indian face. You don't know if it's a mask or not. It's pretty sure it's a mask by the end of the film. Attacks this woman with a power drawer, a massive power drawer that is the De Palma's defense of how big it is because he's using it to open a safe. So he's robbing her, this woman, and she's being watched by the central character in the film, played by Craig Wasson, who is not very good.
He was a bit of a charisma vacuum.
Total charisma vacuum. Yeah. Now, some people have a theory, and I've never seen De Palma, and annoyingly in the film that I've been talking about, the documentary, he's not asked about it, and maybe he didn't want them to ask about it, because Craig Wasson is not, I mean, I don't know what he's done since. I meant to check him out.
Do you know what he was in?
Yeah.
I know this because I've got my horror nerd hat on. He was in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors, and that's the only other film I know of that I've seen him in.
There you go.
Yeah.
But so he plays this actor. He's playing a frustrated actor who, in the very first scene, is supposed to be. The other thing about it, why I kind of forgot that it's not actually a horror film, because of course the milieu is horror films, isn't it? So he's in a horror film.
Yes,
at the beginning.
Course. Yes,
he's playing a vampire.
Horror film.
He's making horror films.
Yeah.
And he's fired from this horror film because he's got claustrophobia and he can't be in the coffin. So that's the opening scene. The opening scene is classic De Palma. He does put his men through it. You know, he put his men through it psychologically. So this actor, played by Craig Wasson, a bad actor played by a bad actor. And I think so. The theory that some people have is he deliberately casts the charisma vacuum as this not very good actor.
Okay,
that's what he wanted. As
a
meta way, yeah. Like, how do you get a really good actor to play a bad actor? So, you know, but I do think it's a big flaw. I often think, I'm thinking of who he could have had in it would have made it so much better.
Yeah.
So anyway, Craig playing this bad actor who's fired right at the beginning of the film, and then he goes home and his girlfriend or wife, can't remember which, is having sex with another man.
Yeah.
So he's having a really bad day. Then he goes to some terrible acting class and he has to relive some awful traumatic moment from his youth, and it just gets worse. And then finally, the only good thing that happens is he meets this guy who gives him his lavish LA Sunset Boulevard or Hollywood Hills mansion to live in, to water the plants.
It looks like some sort of UFO, or it's hilarious.
Which is a real house. I think it's still there in the Hollywood Hills. So he's in this unbelievable house, and he's got the guy alerts him to his telescope where he can look at, classic De Palma. This woman who undresses and basically caresses herself every night. Dances around to a terrible, terrible bit of soundtrack music, I think. Her theme is awful, I have to say. I think it's Pino Donaggio again. And then eventually one thing leads to another, and he watches her being killed by the killer in the killing scene. But of course, unlike Rear Window, he does act, and he immediately runs over to the neighbouring flat where he's watching it and tries to intervene, gets attacked by a dog. Blah blah blah. But I think that scene is horror, isn't it? The drilling scene is undeniably pure horror.
Yeah.
And yet and then there's the world of horror films in it. Then in the second half, I mean, it just goes completely whack. That's like the first half of the film.
Yeah.
The second half, which it introduces Melanie Griffith's character, who's this porno actress, and he wanted an actual porno actress to play this role. Originally, he famously auditioned real porno actresses and almost cast them, and the studio wouldn't let him. This is a studio film, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Studio wouldn't let him cast, so he cast Melanie Griffith gamely.
Yeah.
Does all kinds of stuff in the film, brilliantly.
Yeah.
And from then on, she forms this kind of friendship with the Craig Russell character, and they're trying to work out in slightly Dressed to Kill manner, what's going on, who the killer is, etc.
And by this point, it's so much Vertigo. I mean, all I could think of was Vertigo. He becomes obsessed with this woman who happens to look identical to the woman he's just seen killed, and all that stuff. It's and obviously he's got this condition, this claustrophobia, which is completely his Vertigo.
That totally is Vertigo.
It's so
there's a long scene, and so the other thing, and the other reason why I wanted you to watch it was, and one reason why it's so is connected to it. It's like he's remaking his own film half the time. He's got this incredible, even longer walking and stalking scene in the shopping centre, which I believe is I can't remember the name of it, but I've been there. I actually went there because I was nice. That's how sad I am.
Nice.
That's how sad I am. It's this labyrinthine shopping centre in LA, and it's just Craig Russell following this woman that he's seen dancing naked, like endlessly. And really funnily in the documentary, De Palma proudly says, "I think that's the longest walking scene in the history of cinema." So in this, I'd
say it was,
in this supposed to be a commercial studio thriller, where he's basically pushing his boundaries again and seeing what he can do that Hitchcock couldn't have done in Vertigo.
Yeah,
he's outdoing himself. The walking scene in Dressed to Kill wasn't enough for him. It's an even longer one. It must go on for 15-20 minutes.
Brilliant.
Kind of doesn't really go anywhere. And there's a brilliant bit where he watches the woman trying on knickers in the shop and the cool security. Anyway, so there's that. There's the walking. There's a massive scene on the beach, which is like a Visconti film, which is a bit like what's it called? Death in Venice. I got there eventually. Where the guy's obsessively walking, trying to find this boy. Yeah. So there's that. There's the whole horror milieu. There's a Frankie Goes to Hollywood music video scene. Let's not forget of Relax,
bizarre,
which is like De Palma's weird. Not actually as out there version of the Relax video as the actual Relax video. Which I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's famously was banned at the time. It's really out there kind of thing. Absolutely demented, and again in documentary, so well, it was the early 80s, and people had music videos in their films. Why not do it? So it's a melange, isn't it?
It is
all kinds of utter weird stuff, shoving it all together. I still love it. I mean, it is bad. There's brilliant bits. There's some terrible bits. Craig Russell isn't very good. I think Melanie Griffith is really good.
She is. She's very good.
She's great.
Yeah. It did feel like one of those movies when I was a kid where I turn on, Channel 5 late at night and catch some kind of cheap erotic thriller.
Right,
I mean, that is what it felt like.
And weirdly and annoyingly, I think the director of photography, I'm just checking, the director of Stephen H. Burham was shot Body Double, whereas Dressed to Kill is shot by a much better cinematographer. I think it is interesting, and it's also widescreen. So, Dressed to Kill is shot in scope beautifully and lit incredibly, and every single scene looks incredible and it's really atmospheric. Body Double is shot in kind of normal 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio, just to have some aspect ratio geekery, and it's shot kind of like, as you say, it's got a kind of cheap look to it, like the lighting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I didn't know whether it was maybe compared to the Arrow Blu-ray or whatever, the one I watched, because it looked a lot grainier.
Yeah, it's grain. I mean, it's grainy, which I like, but it just doesn't look, and I think it was all deliberate. I mean, he knows what he's doing. I mean, I think the budget wasn't as big. It wasn't a huge budget, but he just wanted to have a kind of, I don't know, I think it was part of this whole thing that he wanted to make. So his original plan, I haven't even mentioned this, for Body Double, was to make a kind of a porn thriller, Hitchcockian thriller, again, doing that thing that I said, what could Hitchcock get away with now? Right. And he wanted to try and get away with everything. And of course, because he ended up being with a studio, they were like, well, they're not going to let you shoot a hardcore porn thriller with drilling and murder and this and that. But that was his original idea. Right. And then he ended up doing a film with a lot of nudity, a lot of frontal nudity, there's a lot of women's breasts in this film, aren't there? Yes. But and there's the drilling, but that's as far as it goes. It's not like there's no even softcore sex really.
No, and then the rest of it is pretty much walking.
There's walking, a lot of walking. Exactly, you're right. Yeah. So I mainly wanted you to see it because who knows what the fuck it is. I mean, it's
It's
not
mental.
a horror film, of course, but it has horror tropes and it has the drilling scene, and and it's maximum De Palma in its weird way. So that's partly what. Yeah, so it's more like, well, this is part of the key De Palma oeuvre.
He thought he was watching her, but she was watching him.
There is an interesting conversation to be had with these movies, these two movies that we've discussed tonight, and where that line is drawn between horror and thriller and erotica, and how they all kind of mesh, particularly in the sort of late 70s and 80s. When you look at famous movies that are quote-unquote thrillers, like Seven, or arguably The Silence of the Lambs, or, Blue Velvet, these types of movies, yes, they're generally regarded as thrillers, but they all definitely take tropes from horrors, and especially slashers, actually. I think the slasher genre is absolutely connected to these kinds of erotic B-movie thrillers that people like Brian De Palma were making.
For me, it's like, I think once you're... Seven's one of my favourite films. These are all, funnily enough, like really... I mean, Seven, I would put Seven and... Dressed to Kill, and Silence of the Lambs up there in my top 10, definitely.
Yeah, Silence of the Lambs is in my top 5, I would say.
And I think probably they are. I think they are all horror films to me, because they are. But they're obviously they're thrillers, and they're kind of, and they've all got brilliant scripts, and they've all got something much more to them than just murder, and scaring you. But they all definitely scare you as well. I think once a film. Now it's like people talk about jump scares, don't they, in horror films as being the basic way of scaring people, which obviously it is. But there's stuff going on in Silence of the Lambs that is just trying to scare you in the moment, and to be as scary and terrifying as possible. Whether it's Hannibal Lecter, I'm thinking of the Hannibal, not Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter in the kind of escape scene where he rips the face off. All of that scene is horror to me.
Yeah.
And it's nasty and brutal, and you're scared. You're absolutely, your pulse is racing throughout that scene. Yeah. And similarly, I think in Seven, even though it's proper police procedural, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing scarier than the climax of that film.
God, yeah.
And
the sloth moment as well. The sloth moment, pretty horror.
Really horror, yeah. So there's definitely a lot of scary. So I think once you're setting out at key moments in a film to scare people, then to me it's horror. Yeah, I guess Psycho is a brilliant example, isn't it? Because Psycho is a thriller, but what makes it an incredibly influential masterpiece, really, and really one of the very first, as I'm sure you've covered, horror films, is what pushes it beyond all of the other stuff Hitchcock was doing. Yeah, the shower scene, which is pure horror. And the other kind of really nasty visual elements of it that happen a couple more times in that film. Yeah.
So before we finish, just a few quick questions that we fire. I'm firing at everyone. Some of these might cross over with films you've already discussed already. But I was going to say, what was the earliest horror film you remember seeing as a kid?
I think it must have been Psycho. Yeah.
Was it? Yeah.
I think so, because I remember quite clearly watching it on TV. I think I was probably about 10 or something, and being incredibly excited about it. Yeah, it just seemed so brilliantly done and scary, and I'm kind of enjoying being scared by it and not really knowing what the hell was going on, and just the kind of and again the visual inventiveness of it at the same time. So I think watching Psycho really young was partly what got me into really liking films, but it certainly was the first horror film I remember watching. Yeah.
Nice. What is the scariest movie you've ever seen? What movie scared you more than anything else?
That's interesting. I was definitely scared by Halloween the first time I saw that.
Yeah. Was there ever, when you were younger, a movie that you put off watching for fear of it being too scary or too much?
No, I remember for years. I mean, I love The Exorcist, and for years when I was growing up, you couldn't. It was really difficult to watch it. It was unbelievably not available in this country, banned effectively. I mean, Mark Kermode is the expert, and he's made documentaries about it. But back in the days of before DVD, when you just had VHS and all of that, I mean, it was hard to buy films to watch anyway. Yeah. But it was never shown on TV in this country, and it wasn't freely available on VHS. So it was really hard to get hold of, and I was absolutely furious that I couldn't watch it because I was reading all about it. And eventually, I remember the first time I saw it, I was in America. I think I was on my year abroad as a student. I think when I was 18, maybe, and finally it was freely available in America. I was I can finally watch The Exorcist, and that was terrifying. I was genuinely. I was terrified by that.
There's so much about the hype for that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Everyone had that experience, I think, of having heard about The Exorcist before watching it for the first time.
And it doesn't. I don't think The Exorcist lets you down. Maybe The Exorcist is the scariest film I've seen. Actually, I remember. So I did find. I just got the VHS and watched it in a friend's flat on my own. I think, kind of in the dark, and it was like unbelievably, horrendously scary. Yeah. But just because, I mean, don't need to go on about it. But the stuff that he's getting away with in that. That Regan gets up to.
And it's even aside from those few moments in the bedroom, it's the kind of overall mood of the whole thing. It's the sort of terror throughout. It's
exactly. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember recently, all of the kind of. Really exploitative, like Human Centipede. Oh god, yeah. I don't like those. I mean, I've definitely watched the first one, and I hated it. But I hated it, and it worked in the sense that it really repelled me. Yeah. And I did find it scary. I mean, I have to admit, there is a kind of effective quality to that first one, I think. And then I tried to watch the second one. I couldn't sit through it. I could try to watch it on DVD. I was like, no, I give up. And the third one, I think I tried to watch again. Couldn't watch that one either.
I don't think I watched the third one. Yeah, after the second one, I was like, I'm done.
So I draw the line with those. And there was a couple. There was about 2 or 3 years ago. There were a few films that were like, oh, we're trying to make the most extreme violence and stuff, and those are I try to sit. I try all of them because I feel like a duty so to do. But those I don't like. I can't. Those are too much for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I was sort of chatted to Kim Newman about this briefly, but do you think that there's a line that horror movies should not cross? Like when you look at some movies like, I don't know, Cannibal Holocaust or a Serbian film or all those
Serbian film. That's the one I was thinking
those
of.
Types of
I
movies,
couldn't stand that.
Yeah, that it kind of goes beyond just being a horror movie in a weird way, I think.
Yeah, because I think it's not a greatly ambitious design to build a film around the most horrendous acts you can possibly think of.
Yeah, doesn't necessarily mean good filmmaking.
No, it doesn't even mean scary. It just means repellent. I think to come up with, there's a difference between coming up with the most repellent things you can do to portray them on screen. We've all got these things in our mind. We're all aware of what the most repellent things are that people can do to each other. It's not inventive anyway, is it? So I don't feel. So there's a kind of basicness to those types. A Serbian film is a good example, and I just thought, oh no, this isn't. I mean, what? It's not impressive. It's kind of impressive technically, maybe, that you can you can make it look like these horrible things are happening in front of you. But that's it. And I can't be impressed with just trying to do that. And I think that is a world away from Halloween and Dress to Kill and The Exorcist.
Absolutely, and all the best of the best.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me. And so, you do a bunch of other podcasts, don't you? Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, people can find you out there.
Well, that's very kind of you to plug my other. I do weekly of Heat Unmissables podcast.
Yes.
Which is called that if you look at it on iTunes. And we review films and TV every week, pop culture, sometimes books and music and stuff. It's kind of like what the big pop culture things are every week with colleagues. So that we do every week. And my football one, Arsenal one, will be back in the start of the new season. I don't know when. Yeah. Excellent. And I'll do that every week.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure.
Thank you. And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to the brilliant Boyd Hilton. Now, don't forget, if you want to give us your feedback, lend us your thoughts on Dress to Kill, or, Brian De Palma in general. Are you a fan of his work, of his kind of extreme directing style? Are you a fan of Body Double, if you caught that one? What's your favourite Brian De Palma movie? Please do get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also tweet @evolutionpod. And don't forget, you can find Boyd Hilton on Twitter @Boyd Hilton. Now, if I were you, because he does so many things, I would simply follow him on Twitter to find out where you can hear more of his stuff. Now, as much as it was quite a treat this week to talk about something that was a little bit off from the usual slasher movies, talking about a movie with Michael Caine feels quite unusual when you've been talking about movies like Halloween and Black Christmas previously. But next week, we're very much back to the traditional slasher movie. In fact, we're going to talk about arguably the most famous and iconic slasher franchise of all time. I don't think there's many people out there that wouldn't have heard of a machete-wielding, hockey-masked serial killer called Jason, who is accompanied by the music I am, of course, talking about that 1980 slasher classic, Friday the 13th. Joining me to discuss all things Friday the 13th will be my very good friend Rob Watts, who joined me all the way back when on episode 1 in our introduction to horror. He will be back, and together we will be dissecting just exactly what it was about this film that sparked the biggest horror franchise of all time. Join me next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.